Hey folks, Valentin the Mad here, and today we'll be looking at the response mechanics in Dead Island 2. So, I was very much looking forward to this one. The trailers looked great. A game that is all about just mauling zombies in a variety of ways, with detailed feedback for every hit, for whatever you do. And now that we have it out, I can say straight up, this really is something else. So, let's get right into it and see what the F.L.E.S.H system is all about. As for dismemberment, you actually have preset points of amputation, about 4 or 5 per limb, and I think it might vary between the zombies. You have 2 torso size variations. Initially, you get the impression that dismemberment could be dynamic. You don't have pre-made stumps, the bone can be cut at specific positions, but the damage around it is largely dynamic. And you have points of amputation that aren't just at the joint, so that also very much helps set such an impression. But yeah, those are good old preset points of amputation, still, dismemberment doesn't feel lacking in that regard. More on pre-made limb damage, for blunt impacts or explosives, you will have bones break very visibly and the limb will dangle around. If you are familiar with the channel, I have talked about wanting to see it a lot, and this is one of the few games that actually have it, and it delivers that beautifully. As for the head damage, quite a lot of love has been put into it. The very initial response is the multi-layer damage for the skin and muscles. And yeah, the feedback is just gnarly. More along this line, you can give haircuts to certain zombies. If you recall the Soldier of Fortune 1 review, we had a tanning salon and now business is expanding. Anyway, not every zombie will have that much detail in the haircuts, but you can for the very least scalp every zombie, which leads to the next feature, which is the many breakpoints and ways to damage the head. Think the Soldier of Fortune 2 head damage, but on steroids. I happened to capture a nice showcase of, I think, most of it on a single zombie. We'll call him William. So, dangling lower jaw, and eyeball 2. Now both eyeballs are dangling. The lower jaw is no longer dangling. Quite a few weeks later he was partially scalped, and a chunk of the brain got removed. Now the V-shaped head split, you'll be seeing that one a lot. And yeah, you can go further and you'll be getting very nasty results. What is weird that, for some reason, those final remains really refuse to come off. Either way, thank you, William. As for bladed weapons, the head damage will very much be used for slicing too. It won't be quite smooth because the damage is the same you have for blunt hits and the firearms, and it is far more fitting for those, but you're gonna be getting very cool outcomes nonetheless. Way more variety of possible results than you get in most games. Now we get to the meat of it, the multiplayer system, and that one is on a whole new level. You actually have multiple top layers. It can be skin or even multiple layers of clothes. Around it there will be blood, which looks quite nice. Below it, you have a layer of muscle and fat with varying degrees of thickness. That one also looks really good. So, you don't just have a top layer then organs or some rough transition, this stuff looks gnarly. And below that, you have the bones and organs layer, most of which can also be destroyed piece by piece. The organs can be completely cleared out until all you have remaining is the spine and a few ribs. On top of that, you can disembowel characters. And, as is very clearly visible, the organs will jiggle independently of the body, which also delivers a very cool effect. The end result of it all is incredible. When you see all of that get activated at the very spot you hit the character with whatever you use, and all of that happening dynamically. The feel for that is just, as I mentioned, really something else. Some of the results it can deliver legitimately look better than pre-made damage I've seen in other games. So, massively impressed by it, amazing work all around. Now, as for the hazards. So for burning and electricity, you have a charred character, some torn clothes, and there will be some removal of layers for that extra factor of nastiness. The explosives are also quite cool. The focus there is on torn clothes, torn flesh, along with the occasional dismemberment and bone breaking. But my favorite one, by far, is the acid. So yeah, you have the system utilized for dynamic flesh melting, and it is as glorious as it sounds. I wasn't a fan of the weapon mods very much, but acid is the only exception. The area that gets smacked will get melted, and the response is just amazing. For the puddles, you'll be getting the all-over response, but when you get it partially affected area, it just looks so bloody cool, and yeah, it is one of my favorite things here. Speaking of the all-over response, I had this moment happen. With the bodybuilder character, the glowing red eyes and the melting flesh, it almost felt like the T-800 exoskeleton review scene. Just cool stuff. Now, as for issues, limitations and feedback. The hazards, with the exception of acid, will largely be an all-over response. So, you won't have partially burned characters to any meaningful degree. And for explosives, you also have all-over damage rather than tearing from the direction of the explosion. Acid won't melt the organs. Shouldn't happen on the first hit, but if someone gets repeat doses, I think it would be appropriate. As for dismemberment, cutting in half can be often way too easy. As in, you do it with a regular swing from a single-handed weapon. So, the first few hits, you get the appropriate response with the glorious multi-layer damage, And on the final one, you get the cutting in half, which just makes it feel weightless and certainly far less interesting than you would have had if you could just keep carving. Now, there very much are games where such cutting in half is actually the satisfying response, even if it may happen way too easily. But when you have multiplayer damage as good as this, resorting to more generic responses, especially when they are not required, is a bad call. The shotgun response is a very weird one. It is quite good at carving out the top layers, but it barely does anything to the organs. You have to repeatedly shoot to see pretty much anything. As for guns versus head, I do have a few points of feedback. So, if the finishing hit will be low, you will have a decapitation. I think if the hit wasn't powerful enough to annihilate the whole head or even most of it, the more satisfying response would have been making it dangle. Now if you hit higher and you activate the head damage, what you essentially get is a partial decapitation with a single large chunk falling off. For a firearm, I think the preferred response would have been to just annihilate the chunk of the head into small bits. The big issue of it all, however, is the theme of bullet sponges and the RPG aspect of it. So, with the F.L.E.S.H system, with all I mentioned, you could think this would be the one. This would be the game that will finally make combat with bullet spongy characters be satisfying. After all, there's a lot to remove and the level of detail is massively impressive. Well, that isn't the case. So, what basically happens is, when you encounter a bullet spongy character, the initial hits will show very little response. Very surface level stuff. And, as it gets closer to dying, you will see more meaningful damage, with the end result not looking all too different from your average zombie encounter. Not too many swings ago, I was barely digging into him, and now gets cut in half by a single-handed axe. The RPG stuff can get even more ridiculous, to the point of no response on the initial hits on the character, and you get taken down with one swing. So, I think this all is a massive waste of opportunity. The spongier characters perhaps should literally have thicker skin, but you also should be able to mess them up very nicely and essentially have them go down when they're a badly mangled mess. Remember this guy from one of the trailers? You absolutely can have all of this damage, but only if you keep shooting a body post-mortally. I haven't seen a single live zombie come at me in a similar state. In the bottom line of the body damage, I think the system itself is fantastic. The limitations and the rough spots it has are really not relevant at this stage. The issues are entirely with the activation and some with the game design. I think we don't always have optimal utilization of the system and the effect won't be as strong as it could be. I think all of the leveling stuff, the game of damage numbers, doesn't add to the experience. Let weapons be weapons and deliver the damage you would expect them to, let zombies be zombies and let them take even more abuse, all while showing the appropriate damage. As for the environment aspect, that will be centered around droplets, puddles, on walls you have blood running down, and you have this lovely mess for a head stump. So there will be quite a lot of staining. You'll be seeing spinning on the initial impacts, blood trails, severed body parts will be staining the environment, those include organs too, and stumps will also be spilling blood. The initial feedback will be quite messy, and I especially like the looks of the puddles and how those work. The game has a puddling mechanic for the various fluids, and it is used for blood as well. However, there are issues. So, you actually won't have blood pools from below the character after a fatal puncturing hit. As I mentioned, spilling from stumps will stain. You may have a massive response stain that looks like a blood pool, but not a puddle forming below the body itself. For acid, when you have the dripping effect, there should be puddles around the whole character. But a big one, of course, is that all of the staining will begin vanishing in about 5 or 10 seconds, so there will be no sense of an aftermath beyond the very initial response. And I can get it. With the body damage being that detailed and with the way the staining works, having a massive amount of mess would probably bring any PC to its knees. That is also why we don't have bits and pieces, why organs vanish very quickly, and the head stomp mess as well. However, it should be configurable. At this stage, probably not in the menu, but definitely somewhere in the INI files. As in, if you tweak it and your frame rate is a slideshow, that's all on you. But eventually, there will come a day when we will have the hardware to run both the amazing body damage system and have all of the mess stay. So, for future-proofing, or for anyone with an overkill machine, it should be configurable in the INI file at this stage. As for the animations, they react on impact. Characters can get knocked over. You have death animations. At other times ragdolls. Charge attack animations. A stun state. Finishers for characters in that stun state. And they can survive limb dismemberment. So, as you can see, you have a whole bunch of possible responses and animations, and generally, it is a pretty good example of what a zombie game should have. I do have a few points of feedback. Very often the ragdoll will be quite exaggerated. And sure, the game is not very serious and it is basically in the theme, but it very much takes away from the weight. So, you will have the appropriate response animations several times and, on the ragdolling hit, the character just gets sent flying. Sometimes it can be kind of appropriate, sometimes it can deliver fun moments, but more often than not, I think it is detrimental. I do like the functionality of the charge attack and of the stun state finishers, but those very much could use more variety. There's about 1 or 2 of each per weapon. And lastly, not directly response related, but the lack of control over the direction of your attacks is an issue. I think in a game like this, especially with the kind of response you have on the receiving end, being able to choose your angle of attack is very much needed. In the bottom line, despite the issues, this one very much goes into the response mechanics Hall of Fame. The body damage system is on a whole new level. I never saw multiplayer damage that is as detailed and as good as this. There is a massive wow factor when you first try it, and even when you are well familiar with the system, you still have many moments that just blow you away. As for the blood spilling, the mechanics themselves are actually very good, but when everything disappears so quickly, it feels massively underwhelming. And animation-wise, you generally get what you would want from a zombie game, with the main issue being the overuse of exaggerated ragdolls. Overall, it is one I can very much recommend. King of the category currently in terms of body damage, by far. I do hope though that it can be modded. With some tweaks to certain aspects, I think the experience can be notably enhanced. That is it for today. do let me know how you feel in the comment section, and if you enjoyed the video, subscribe and share it around. As you can imagine, no monetization on this one, so if you are enjoying the content, do consider supporting on Patreon. Every contribution very much helps. And if you like the music you hear in the intro, outro, and in the background, the YouTube and Spotify playlists are in the description. Until next time!